I know there's a question in there somewhere, because you're making a whole bunch of assertions, half of which I disagree with, and I'm having to sit here listening to them. At some point, I know you're going to let me answer.
That's the
This conservative politician assumed he had trapped Obama, but the subsequent outcome proved completely devastating for his main argument. He arrived with scripted campaign rhetoric, and Obama countered using solid evidence he couldn't refute. View this because their interaction clearly highlights the disconnect between political catchphrases and reality.
Jeb, Mr. President.
How are you?
I'm doing well. Mr. President, a year ago, I had an opportunity to speak to you about the national debt. And something that you and I have in common is we both have small children.
Absolutely.
And I left that conversation really feeling your sincere commitment to ensuring that our children, our nation's children, do not inherit an unconscionable debt. We know that under current law, that government, the cost of government is due to grow from 20% of our economy to 40% of our economy, and right about the time our children are leaving college and getting that first job. Mr. President, shortly after that conversation a year ago, the Republicans proposed a budget that ensured that government did not grow beyond the historical standard of 20% of GDP. It was a budget that actually froze immediately non-defense discretionary spending. It spent $5 trillion less than ultimately what was enacted into law. And unfortunately, I believe that budget was ignored. And since that budget was ignored, what were the old annual deficits under Republicans have now become the monthly deficits under Democrats. The national debt has increased 30%. Now, Mr. President, I know you believe, and I understand the argument, and I respect the view that the spending is necessary due to the recession. Many of us believe, frankly, it's part of the problem, not part of the solution, but I understand and I respect your view. But this is what I don't understand, Mr. President. After that discussion, your administration proposed a budget that would triple the national debt over the next 10 years. Surely you don't believe 10 years from now we will still be mired in this recession. It proposed new entitlement spending and moved the cost of government to almost 24.5% of the economy. Now, very soon, Mr. President, you're due to submit a new budget. And my question
Jim, I know there's a question in there somewhere, because you're making a whole bunch of assertions, half of which I disagree with, and I'm having to sit here listening to them. At some point, I know you're going to let me answer.
That's the question. You are soon to submit a new budget, Mr. President. Will that new budget, like your old budget, triple the national debt and continue to take us down the path of increasing the cost of government to almost 25% of our economy? That's the question, Mr. President.
Jim, with all due respect, I've just got to take this last question as an example of how it's very hard to have the kind of bipartisan work that we're going to do, because the whole question was structured as a talking point for running a campaign. Now, look, let's talk about the budget once again, because I'll go through it with you line by line. The fact of the matter is that when we came into office, the deficit was $1.3 trillion. 1.3. So when you say that suddenly I've got a monthly budget that is higher than the annual, or a monthly deficit that's higher than the annual deficit left by the Republicans, that's factually just not true. And you know it's not true. And what is true is that we came in already with a $1.3 trillion deficit before I had passed any law. What is true is we came in with $8 trillion worth of debt over the next decade. Had nothing to do with anything that we had done. It had to do with the fact that in 2000, when there was a budget surplus of $200 billion, you had a Republican administration and a Republican Congress, and we had 2 tax cuts that weren't paid for. You had a prescription drug plan the biggest entitlement plan, by the way, in several decades that was passed without it being paid for. You had 2 wars that were done through supplementals. And then you had $3 trillion projected because of the lost revenue of this recession. That's $8 trillion. Now, we increased it by $1 trillion because of the spending that we had to make on the stimulus. I am happy to have any independent fact checker out there take a look at your presentation versus mine in terms of the accuracy of what I just said. Now, going forward, here's the deal. I think Paul, for example, head of the Budget Committee, has looked at the budget and has made a serious proposal. I've read it. I can tell you what's in it. And there's some ideas in there that I would agree with, but there's some ideas that we should have a healthy debate about because I don't agree with. The major driver of our long-term liabilities, everybody here knows, is Medicare and Medicaid and our health care spending. Nothing comes close. Social Security we could probably fix the same way Tip O'Neill and Ronald Reagan sat down together and they could figure something out. That is manageable. Medicare and Medicaid, massive problem down the road. That's going to be what our children have to worry about. Now, Paul's approach, and I want to be careful not simplifying this because I know you've got a lot of detail in your plan. But if I understand it correctly, it would say we're going to provide vouchers of some sort for current Medicare recipients at the current level. No? 55. Well, no, I understand. I mean, there's a grandfathering in, but just for future beneficiaries, right? That's why I said I didn't want to. I want to make sure that I'm not being unfair to your proposal, but I just want to point out that I've read it, and the basic idea would be that at some point we hold Medicare cost per recipient constant as a way of making sure that that doesn't go way out of whack. And I'm sure there's some details that
we grow it at a blend of inflation and health inflation. Right. The point of our plan is, because Medicare, as you know, is a $38 trillion unfunded liability. Right. It has to be reformed for younger generations because it won't exist because it's going bankrupt. And the premise of our idea is, look, why not give people the same kind of health care plan we here have in Congress? That's the kind of reform we're proposing for Medicare.
Right. So, look, as I said before, this is an entirely legitimate proposal. The problem is twofold. One is that depending on how it's structured, if recipients are suddenly getting a plan that has their reimbursement rates going like this, but healthcare costs are still going up like that, then over time, the way we're saving money is essentially by capping what they're getting relative to their costs. Now, I just want to point out, and this brings me to the second problem. When we made a very modest proposal as part of our package, our healthcare reform package, to eliminate the subsidies going to insurance companies for Medicare Advantage, we were attacked across the board by many on your aisle for slashing Medicare. You remember? We're going to start cutting benefits for seniors. That was the story that was perpetrated out there, scared the dickens out of a lot of seniors. No, but here's my point. If the main question is going to be what do we do about Medicare costs, any proposal that Paul makes will be painted factually from the perspective of those who disagree with it as cutting benefits over the long term. Paul, I don't think you disagree with that. That there is a political vulnerability to doing anything that tinkers with Medicare. And that's probably the biggest savings that are obtained through Paul's plan. And I raise that not because we shouldn't have a serious discussion about it. I raise that because we're not going to be able to do anything about any of these entitlements if what we do is characterize whatever proposals are put out there as, well, you know, that's the other party is being irresponsible. The other party's trying to hurt our senior citizens. That the other party is doing X, Y, Z. That's why I say, if we're going to frame these debates in ways that allow us to solve them, then we can't start off by figuring out, A, who's to blame, B, how can we make the American people afraid of the other side? And unfortunately, that's how our politics works right now. That's how a lot of our discussion works. That's how we start off every time somebody speaks in Congress. The first thing they do, they stand up and all the talking points, you know, I see Frank Lutz up here sitting in the front. He's already polled it, and he said, you know, the way you're really going to, I've done a focus group, and, you know, the way we're going to really box in Obama on this one or make Pelosi look bad on that one. I know, I like Frank. We've had conversations between Frank and I, but that's how we operate. It's all tactics, and it's not solving problems. And so the question is, at what point can we have a serious conversation about Medicare and its long-term liability, or a serious question about a serious conversation about Social Security, or a serious conversation about budget and debt, in which we're not simply trying to position ourselves politically. That's what I'm committed to doing. We won't agree all the time in getting it done, but I'm committed to doing it.
If a flawless illustration ever existed showing why hard evidence matters more than political grandstanding, this certainly was it. The conservative lawmaker entered this interaction with a prepared monologue rather than an actual inquiry. He spent nearly his entire allotted time reciting campaign rhetoric about surging debt, excessive government expenditures, and grim prophecies that America was allegedly barreling toward financial ruin, and Obama caught on instantly. He did not interrupt after the initial remark, and he avoided cutting him off midway through. He simply sat there listening while the lawmaker presented what was essentially a political advertisement masked as an inquiry. Then Obama voiced exactly what every viewer was thinking: I know there is an inquiry hidden somewhere inside there. That remark resonated because it was accurate. The lawmaker was not seeking a genuine response, but rather hunting for a viral political soundbite long before viral political soundbites were a common phenomenon. However, Obama subsequently did something that is growing increasingly scarce in American politics. He began explaining the actual figures instead of yelling back or hurling personal insults. He reminded the public where the national deficit genuinely stood when he took office, noting that the severe economic crisis did not just materialize overnight. He reminded the crowd about the unfunded Bush tax reductions, the Medicare prescription drug expansion that conservatives themselves enacted without paying for, and 2 foreign wars funded primarily through heavy borrowing. Those are not subjective opinions, but rather historical truths. That is exactly why Obama felt confident enough to say he would welcome any objective fact-checker to evaluate both arguments. Consider that notion for a brief moment. How many modern leaders openly invite independent fact-checkers into a debate? Very few, because too many contemporary political disputes rely heavily on voters never actually verifying the receipts. Here is the segment that truly highlighted the underlying hypocrisy. The lawmaker insisted that federal spending was suddenly intolerable under Obama, yet Obama reminded the room that many major contributors to long-term debt had strong bipartisan origins or conservative origins attached to them long before his presidency began. You cannot suddenly transform into a strict fiscal hawk only after your political faction leaves power. Either federal deficits always matter, or they simply do not. That is the exact double standard Obama was firmly exposing. What further impressed me while observing this interaction is that Obama never pretended America's enduring financial troubles were fictitious. In reality, he openly recognized them, specifically identifying Medicare and Medicaid as the primary drivers of future federal spending pressures. He even commended specific elements of Paul Ryan's legislative framework before detailing exactly where his fundamental disagreements resided. That is what effective leadership is supposed to resemble. You acknowledge when your rival presents a valid concern, you clarify where mutual agreement exists, and then you articulate why you believe their proposed remedy introduces fresh complications. Contrast that approach with our current political climate, where genuine disagreement is viewed as betrayal and seeking compromise is framed as weakness. Obama was not implying conservatives lacked concepts. He was arguing their strategy transferred a heavier burden onto future Medicare beneficiaries by capping federal assistance, even while medical expenses could keep escalating faster than that provided support. Whether you support Obama's preferred strategy or not, that remains a meaningful policy dispute, and that is precisely how serious debates ought to unfold. Subsequently, Obama delivered what was undoubtedly the most compelling argument of the entire confrontation. He reminded the room that conservatives had aggressively criticized even minor decreases to Medicare Advantage funding during the intense Affordable Care Act negotiations. Those identical lawmakers who previously attacked Democrats for allegedly slashing Medicare were now advancing significantly larger structural overhauls to the exact same initiative. That is blatant political opportunism in action. One moment, any slight modification to Medicare is framed as an assault on the elderly. The next moment, massive systemic overhauls suddenly become prudent fiscal stewardship. The accepted metric constantly fluctuates depending entirely on who initiates the proposal. That is the precise hypocrisy Obama needed his audience to recognize, and that is exactly why this particular exchange continues circulating broadly years later. It remains memorable not because Obama launched some spectacular insult, nor because he humiliated a peer with a sharp quip. It is remembered because he methodically dismantled the opposing stance point by point while remaining firmly anchored to objective reality. Modern governance is saturated with passionate monologues, packed with catchy sound bites, and filled with theatrical alarms regarding our collective destiny. Ultimately, however, someone must inevitably question whether those grand assertions actually align with the established historical timeline. That is precisely what occurred here. The representative arrived equipped with a scripted storyline, while Obama answered with crucial historical context. One utilized strategic partisan framing, while the other focused on detailing how the nation truly reached that specific critical juncture. You do not need to endorse every legislative agenda Obama championed to acknowledge that this specific dialogue showcased something incredibly worthwhile. If you intend to issue sweeping declarations regarding national debt, fiscal shortfalls, and federal budgets, you genuinely need verified evidence to support those claims. Otherwise, you are merely broadcasting empty election slogans, and that is fundamentally why this interaction still carries significant weight today. It functions as a powerful testament that governmental discussions are most impactful when they are rooted in verifiable proof rather than catchy phrases, proving that even the most aggressive talking points collapse when rigorously measured against actual events. If you appreciated this analytical review, be sure to subscribe for more extensive examinations into the critical political events that shaped our modern discourse. Additionally, please share in the comments whether you believe instances like this, where leaders are compelled to substantiate their arguments with hard evidence, represent exactly what American governance requires more of today.